I just wanted to say, before I kick into the scripture we've got, I just felt God was challenging me again as you shared about death. I suppose one of the things that really bothers me at the moment is that we can, even as evangelical Christians, Bible-believing Christians, be playing games with God. My wife and I, we try and read in the morning, every morning, and at the moment we're following a book called Day by Day with a Persecuted Church. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. It's basically people who are from persecuted countries that are writing. And there's a lady, I don't know her proper name, I can't even remember the name they've got in the book at the moment, from Soweto in South Africa, who's writing at the moment. And for the last few days she's been talking about her experience. Her husband was a preacher of the gospel, and he preached a message of forgiveness. And a few years ago, he became aware that his life was in danger, because there were so many people in Soweto, black people, saying, stop preaching forgiveness. If you don't stop preaching forgiveness, we'll kill you. And he said, I can't stop preaching forgiveness. They didn't want to forgive, the white man, and I'm not kind of justifying anything that happened in South Africa over the apartheid years and so on. But the end was that he was bludgeoned to death by a gun in Soweto, in front of his 12-year-old son. And his 12-year-old son ran home, managed to escape, ran home and told his mum what had happened. And the story is, he went to bed, and she says that she could hear him crying his heart out in bed because of what he'd seen. And this went on for hours. And then suddenly things changed. And suddenly she could hear him singing a chorus about forgiveness. 12 years old. And since then, she and her son have been preaching in South Africa a message of forgiveness and singing together. And she said, this is what I was reading this morning. She said that she was in one meeting and she preached, and she made an appeal. If anybody wanted to accept Jesus as Lord, to come forward. And she said that there was one man there that seemed very nervous, and she went up to him and asked him what the problem was, and he was very hesitant. And what he said was, in the end, I want to accept Jesus, but I was one of the gang that murdered your husband. And she said suddenly all kinds of feelings came over her as she stood there in front of this man. And God gave her the grace just to hug him and whisper in his ear, "You're now my brother." And I thought, he said, I'm kind of translating the Bible and working, studying scripture every day and so on. You can still be playing with God even while you're doing that, And I'm just thinking to myself, what would I be like in that kind of situation? But of course, God gives us grace to face whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. But the important thing is that we should fix our mind and our eyes on Jesus. And that's the end of my sermon, though. You know me well enough by now. When I come and preach, it doesn't matter what passage you give me to preach on. I say, this is my favourite bit of the Bible. And I do like Hebrews. It's an interesting book, interesting letter in the New Testament, because nobody knows who wrote it. Fascinating. I'm a bit biased myself. I'd like to think that it's the only book in the New Testament written by a woman. Have you covered that?
Priscilla.
Yeah, Priscilla.
Yeah.
I can see a good argument for saying that. There are arguments against. But it's not important really, but who knows it? We know that it was written by a Jewish Christian to Jewish Christians. And those Christians were considering basically turning their backs on Jesus. Kind of turning their backs on the commitment that they'd made to Jesus. We don't know why. Probably it was because of persecution. Maybe some of them because they were losing their first love. We read about that, don't we, in the book of Revelation? They were losing their enthusiasm, and that can happen. I know that's happened in my experience over the years, where, you know, I'm on fire for Jesus, but somehow it kind of dies down. It can happen in all kinds of things. My wife and I, a year after we got married, which is, we got married nearly 20 years ago now, and a year after we went to North India to work in a mission hospital for 6 months. And we saw such poverty there. It was the poorest area in the whole of India, and right on the border with Nepal in North Bihar. We said, we are going to resist materialism. You know, and we tried so hard, and yet we feel we're always failing because we wanted to identify with the poor. And it's a bit like that so often with the faith. We're on fire for Jesus. We've discovered him. We want everybody to know. And then life goes on, things happen, and we find that we're not as enthusiastic as we were before. We might even be still going to church. We might even be going to all the prayer meetings and everything. I must have told you my own experience when I was in college. God was doing amazing things in Bangor in North Wales back in the 70s when I was in college. I don't know how many people came to know Jesus, and we had prayer meetings. Can you imagine students having prayer meetings in the morning before lectures? We did. It was amazing. And I was at every single one of those prayer meetings. And if there was a Bible study, I was there. And if there was anything happening, I was at those meetings. And if somebody had asked another Christian, how's Arfon doing? You know, oh, Arfon's great, he's doing well. He's always at our meetings. You can depend on Arfon. But I know that sometimes months passed by when I was really far from God. Not because I did anything, you know, blatantly kind of sinful or anything, but it was just that it was just religion. It was very orthodox, very evangelical, very biblical religion, but it was religion. And Jesus was in the background somewhere. He was a name, he was a badge maybe, you know. He was if I was in America, I don't know about Australia, but in America he'd be a bumper sticker. You know. It's more than that, isn't it? Yeah. Knowing Jesus and following Jesus. Losing their first love. Or maybe just becoming lazy spiritually. There's evidence that some of them had started not attending worship and so on. And it can happen to us. And the answer is to keep our eyes and keep our thoughts on Jesus. You remember Peter walking on the water? Yeah? What happened when he took his eyes off Jesus? Looked at the storm around him. He started sinking. And that's what will happen to us. You know. He knew Jesus was there, but he saw the problems more than the answer to the problems, if you like. And he started sinking.